The crew of the Meridian had already been patrolling this part of the ocean for the better part of 3 days. On board, they had a captain, a marine biologist, a full crew, and 2 experienced divers, and they all had an important job to do out here in the deep blue. But nobody expected to find this. They were out here sailing in open water due to increasingly concerning reports that came into base over the last couple of weeks. Fishermen called in and shared stories of entire reef sections dying one after another. Some had collapsed and landed on the ocean floor, and other broken pieces ended up in the propellers of ships. It was something that wasn't supposed to happen naturally, so the crew of the Meridian knew something must be wrong with the area out here before setting out to sea. But none of them knew exactly what caused it. That was until they discovered this strange container on the ocean floor. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. On that 3rd day, Captain Booker stood at the rail of the Meridian, watching a flat gray horizon. The Meridian was not an ordinary patrol boat. It was a marine survey and salvage vessel equipped with side-scan sonar, hydrophones, a deck crane, an ROV, and a small dive team. Exactly the kind of vessel needed when nobody yet knew whether the problem was biological, mechanical, or something else entirely. Beside Booker, Dr. Hale spread a set of charts across a work table. The marine biologist had spent the previous 2 days comparing fishermen's reports, reef surveys, and acoustic recordings taken by nearby monitoring stations. One detail bothered her more than the rest: the sounds. Every few minutes, sensitive underwater microphones had recorded the same low-frequency pulse. It was too regular to look like normal seismic activity, and it kept appearing near the areas where fish had vanished and reef damage was worst. "It isn't random," Hale said, marking several positions on the chart. "The strongest signal keeps coming from this section." Booker looked toward the coordinates ahead. "Then that's where we start." As the Meridian approached the area, the sonar picture changed. The seabed became rougher and more chaotic. Broken reef appeared in long patches. Sediment hung in the water, and large sections that should have been full of movement looked strangely empty. Wes, the lead diver, and his partner suited up while the crew held the vessel in position. Before they entered the water, Booker repeated the same instruction he had given them all week. "Observe first. Touch nothing unless you know what it is." The divers rolled over the side and descended. Visibility worsened near the bottom. Their light swept over pale coral, torn growth, and strange linear scars in the seabed. At first, the damage looked chaotic. Then Wes noticed that some of the marks ran in the same direction, almost as if something heavy had been dragged repeatedly across the bottom. He followed one of the scars until his light caught a hard rectangular edge through the haze. Wes stopped. A shipping container sat partly buried in sediment beside the damaged reef. It was coated in rust and marine growth, but not enough to suggest it had been there for decades. Several lifting points were surprisingly clean beneath the corrosion, as if cables had rubbed against them more recently. One end of the container stood partly open. Wes moved closer without entering it. His light passed across a steel framework bolted inside. Then he saw a tiny amber light blink once in the darkness. A second green light remained steady beside it. He stared for several seconds. The container was not empty, and whatever was inside still had power. Wes and his partner surfaced immediately. "There's equipment inside," he told Booker as soon as his mask came off. "Not ordinary cargo. It's bolted down, wired, and there are live indicator lights." That changed the recovery completely. The crew first lowered the ROV to inspect the container from outside. Its camera showed no obvious hazardous markings, no leaking cylinders, and no exposed high-voltage cabling. What it did show were sealed equipment housings, heavy electrical cables, and a cluster of circular metal elements mounted behind a protective frame. Booker decided they needed the object on deck where it could be examined safely. The divers returned to the bottom and attached certified lifting slings to the container's structural corners. The Meridian's crane took the load slowly. Sediment rolled away in clouds as the container broke free of the seabed and began rising through the water. Minutes later, the rusted steel box emerged beside the ship, pouring seawater from its open end. The crane lowered it onto a reinforced section of deck. Nobody approached until the load was secured. Up close, the machine inside looked even stranger. A pressure-rated steel assembly occupied most of the container. Thick cables connected sealed battery modules, a control housing, and a bank of heavy circular components aimed toward the open end. A waterproof clock module and a small antenna housing were mounted beside the control panel. Several lights were still glowing. Chief Engineer Mason crouched near the entrance and studied the equipment without touching it. "This isn't a pump," he said. Dr. Hale looked at the circular elements. "Then what are they?" Mason pointed toward them. "Transducers, big ones." Hale's expression changed. The machine was built to put sound into the water, not music. not communication in the normal sense. Powerful, controlled underwater acoustic signals. Mason found another detail that bothered him. A metal identification plate had once been attached to the main housing, but the surface had been ground smooth. Whatever serial number or manufacturer name had been there was gone. Someone had made the machine difficult to trace. The crew connected one of the Meridian's hydrophones over the side and waited. A low pulse appeared on the monitor, then another. The interval matched the recordings Dr. Hale had been studying for days. At almost the same moment, one of the amber lights on the recovered device flashed. Nobody needed to guess anymore. "This is one of the sources," Hale said. But she was careful about what that meant. The acoustic unit could explain why fish were avoiding certain areas or moving in unusual directions. It did not explain the torn coral and long scars they had seen on the seabed. There was still another piece missing. Before examining the device further, Mason isolated its power through an external service disconnect and verified that the capacitors had discharged. The lights faded one by one until the machine went dark. The crew watched the hydrophone display. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then another low pulse appeared. Hale frowned. The recovered unit was dead. The sound was still there. A second pulse followed from a slightly different bearing, then a third. Mason looked at Booker. "There's more than one." That realization changed the investigation again. The Meridian began a slow acoustic survey of the surrounding water. Instead of trying to recover every object they detected, the crew used the hydrophones and side-scan sonar to map the sources. The first additional signal came from several miles away, then another, and another. By late afternoon, Dr. Hale had marked a series of likely nodes across the chart. She stared at them for a long moment. "They're not scattered." Booker leaned over the table. The positions formed two loose lines that gradually narrowed as they extended away from the damaged reef. A funnel. Whatever the machines were doing, they had been deployed in a deliberate pattern. The Meridian followed the narrowing corridor while remaining well clear of the suspected devices. As they moved, the sonar showed something else. The worst reef damage did not sit directly beneath every acoustic node. Instead, it appeared in broad parallel tracks between them. "Doctor," Hale asked West to review the underwater footage from the first dive. The long scars suddenly made sense. "They're trawl marks," she said. Heavy fishing gear had been dragged across the seabed, breaking coral and stripping habitat along its path. The acoustic machines had not smashed the reef apart with artificial earthquakes. The damage had come from something much more familiar and much more destructive: illegal bottom trawling. But the question remained, why deploy an entire network of underwater sound projectors around it? The answer began to emerge as the Meridian moved farther along the funnel. Fish appeared again on sonar, first in small groups, then in unusually dense concentrations. The schools were not spread naturally across the surrounding water. Many were clustered along the same narrowing corridor marked by the acoustic nodes. Dr. Hale watched the pattern develop across the display. "Different species react differently to sound," she said. "But if these units were tuned to trigger avoidance responses in the fish they wanted, they could keep pushing schools away from one area and toward another, not controlling the fish like machines, pressuring them, narrowing where they could comfortably move." And at the end of that corridor, the crew finally saw what the network appeared to be feeding. A large industrial vessel sat low on the horizon. At first glance, it could have passed for an offshore survey ship. Sensor masts rose above its bridge, and heavy winches covered its aft deck. Then the Meridian got close enough to see the rest. Industrial fishing gear, huge net drums, heavy trawl doors, a broad stern ramp stain-helped from repeated hauling. The vessel was working directly beside a protected reef zone. Booker ordered the Meridian to remain at a distance. The crew recorded its position, photographed the gear, captured the vessel's AIS identification, saved the hydrophone data, and marked every suspected acoustic node they had passed. The ROV footage from the recovered container was copied and backed up. Then the trawler began hauling. A massive net emerged behind it, streaming water as the winches pulled it toward the stern. Fish packed the mesh, mixed with unwanted catch and fragments of broken marine growth. The acoustic units were positioned to help concentrate fish into a narrower harvesting corridor. The vessel then worked that corridor with heavy gear, repeatedly dragging sections of seabed that should never have been touched. The network increased the catch. The trawling destroyed the reef. Booker called Coast Guard Command immediately and transmitted the evidence. This time, nobody talked about trying to hold the other vessel in place. The Meridian simply maintained visual contact from a safe distance while enforcement units were dispatched. The suspect ship appeared to realize it had been watched. Its trawl gear came aboard faster than before. Then it changed course. Booker watched the heading on the navigation display. "They're leaving." The Meridian followed without closing the distance. Then an aircraft appeared overhead. It circled once, then again. The suspect ship slowed. Not long afterward, a Coast Guard cutter came into view from the opposite direction. What investigators found on board connected the remaining pieces. There were several undeployed acoustic units built like the machine recovered from the first container. There were deployment slings and rigging. Computer files showed mapped positions that matched the nodes detected by the Meridian. Other records showed repeated fishing runs through the same protected waters. The crew had not found a mysterious container that happened to be causing an environmental disaster. They had found one piece of a system. Over the following days, authorities used the recovered maps and the Meridian's acoustic survey to locate the remaining devices. Salvage teams lifted them one by one rather than disturbing the reef unnecessarily. Once the nodes were removed and the illegal fishing operation stopped, the repeating underwater signals disappeared. Some fish began returning to the area far sooner than the coral could recover. The reef itself was another matter. Broken coral does not rebuild in a few weeks. Scientists estimated that some sections would need years of protection and restoration before they resembled what had been there before. Dr. Hale returned repeatedly with survey teams to document the recovery.